Hey everybody, welcome to the Multifamily Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Corey Peterson. I've got a great show for you. I have my friend, my buddy, Mauricio Rauld, and he's my PPM lawyer. He's the one that does all my syndications for all my deals, and he's got like total crazy knowledge about what's going on. And so Mauricio, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, Corey. Appreciate it.
Hey, so give me just for my audience, like I know I didn't give you a great introduction, so I want you to like just have everybody tell you who you are and like your accolades, because I mean you've been doing it for a
Yeah,
while.
yeah, I have been doing it a while. So I am an attorney, so hopefully that doesn't put any of your listeners off. Even though people do call me the anti-lawyer because I'm a little bit different than most lawyers. But yeah, I've been a California licensed attorney now for, man, it's going on 18 years. And what I do is I specialize in securities law. So I own a firm. I founded and own a firm called Premier Law Group. And what we do is we help entrepreneurs like yourself basically raise capital so that they can go on and do bigger and better deals. I've been doing this now for, this thing specifically probably over 15 years, helped raise over, I think I'm up to close to $150 million, and just been really laser focused on this particular area of the law, which is a very specialized because it is securities laws, and that can get a little bit daunting, a little boring. But I've been doing that for a while. From an educational standpoint, I went to UC Berkeley, so a shout out to all of your the Cal Bears out there in your audience. Went to law school at Loyola, and then I did what most lawyers dream about, which is I went to work for a law firm down in Long Beach, California. Did a lot of securities laws and a lot of litigation. So I actually started my career doing lawsuits, right? So when somebody got sued and they needed an attorney to represent them in court, that's what I did. They'd call me and I would do the whole litigation process, motions, depositions, trials, all that fun stuff. But I'm sure a lot of your audience members might relate to this, but I got to the point where I just was doing the same thing day in and day out. I was getting up in the morning, I was taking a shower, getting dressed, getting into the car, going to the office, working all day, coming home late, maybe watch a little TV and go to bed and do it all over again. And I just really caught in that rat race mentality, which I didn't even know that it was called back then. So I did an out and wait off for it. Hey, I decided to start making thing. And I was fortunate enough to connect with some real estate related guys, real estate guys you probably heard of, and went to work for them in-house, which is kind of like the dream for lawyers to work in-house for a company. And so I did that for many years, and that's kind of how this started. I then set up my own law firm, and I've been doing this ever since, and it's been great.
Dude, that is amazing. Like, I always say, in this business, multifamily investing, it takes a tribe and a team, right? And so one of the big pieces of what you do for me is in that syndication space, because I coach syndication. I teach it, people, hey, if you can go out there and find other people with money and get them to invest in your deals, you can do a lot bigger deals, and honestly, you can make money faster. But it is a two-edged sword, right? So like, if you're not careful, you got to know what you're doing, because you are taking other people's money. And I feel like you have a fiduciary responsibility to that money as well. But let's talk about, we said the word syndication. Some of my listeners probably don't even know what syndication means. So if you
Yeah.
can, let's start with that, and then let's kind of go on to maybe some little bit higher level stuff. So what to look out for.
Yeah, and a lot of people think syndication is, hey, there's a syndicated radio program or a syndicated TV show. That's not what this is. I mean, syndication is really quite simple. It's just the pooling of resources. Usually it's money, but it's just the pooling of resources in order to make an investment as a team or as a group. And so let me just give you a really simple, basic example that I think will hit the point. Let's say you want to buy a property that's worth $100,000. You can get four of your buddies, right? 25 grand each, and you can then split the profits 5 ways. So your buddies put in the money, you put in all the work, the effort, finding the deal, your expertise, all that stuff, and you split things 5 ways. That's a syndication. It can be as simple as that. Of course, those go up to super complex transactions, but from a conceptual standpoint, it's just pooling the resources. And I think what a lot of people forget when they start or when they're thinking about starting is that it's not all about money. Money is obviously an important resources, but you can have, your time is a very, very valuable resource, your credit, your relationships, your desire. I mean, some people have a lot of money. They couldn't be bothered to go try and figure out how to learn about real estate or spend. I know you and I, Corey, we spent a lot of weekends, attending seminars and getting better and learning, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And like, Some
Yeah.
people couldn't be bothered. They just want to write a check and give it to someone. And so you can step in and provide those other resources that doesn't necessarily have to be money, and win as a team, because then you can do bigger and better and scale your business a lot quicker because you got the leverage.
Yeah, man, that when you just hit it right on the nail on the head, because like a lot of my investors are busy professionals, right? Or they're just retired, like they're done working, like they don't want to work. All they want is someone, but they want to trust someone that they understand the process with, and then they give you their money, and really you're providing other things. And the other part of that PPM, like what PPM does, I like it because it's kind of like my marching orders, and I feel like now, so I come from the fix and flip world, right? And I think there's probably a lot of guys out there that are not doing it correctly, right? They're pooling assets together, and I do want to. Can you touch base on like maybe like what you shouldn't do? Like what makes a security of it? Is it just one person? Is it two people?
Right. So great question. So anytime you are taking money from other people and you're managing that with an expectation of a return, that's a security. So if your investors are passive, they're writing you a check, I don't care if it's one person or if it's 1,000 people, that is going to be considered a security. And where people get hung up a lot is the structure. Hey, if I don't set up an LLC, because everybody instinctively thinks about a security, think of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, they get that. And so they say, hey, well, what if I don't do an LLC or a corporation or an L whatever, and I just do a profit sharing agreement? Or what if I just, hey, why don't we all have direct title and do a TIC agreement? And they get all excited. But you've got to remember, the structure itself doesn't matter. What it matters is, are you basically managing other people's money? And if so, you are issuing a security, you're selling the security to someone, and therefore you must comply with all the securities laws.
Yeah, that's a real reality. And the thing is you definitely want to understand this part of the business, and you don't necessarily have to understand it. You just got to be able to hire great people like you that do, right? And that's the story of my life. I barely met out of high school, so for me to find smart people like Mauricio, like that's what I do best, because I already know that I'm not the most talented, and neither do I want to be the most talented, right? I just want to do what I do well and stay in my lane.
Right. And Corey, not to interrupt, but like that's kind of what I try. I do a lot of speaking gigs, and so I teach this stuff from stage. And what I always try and impress upon the audience is, when I'm up there teaching, I'm really just trying to get them the context so they can kind of understand where the legal part fits into the overall syndication process. It's not going to be up to them to know every single legal law, every single exemption, which we'll talk about in a second, all the nitty gritty. You just need to know kind of an idea of where it fits into the overall puzzle, and then hire an expert that obviously deals with securities laws and can help you in that area.
I feel like that's what we always do. So it's every deal we have. Every deal's different, right? And so it's like, okay, Corey, and I feel like here's what I go, Mauricio, here's kind of what I want to do. I want to do this, this, and this. I only want to pay him this much, and I'm going to do this on this. And how do can you make all that? Is that right? Make it work and structure it in a way that it makes sense.
Yeah.
And then that's what you do. And so like, it's such a great process when it's done right, because and then I can sleep at night knowing that, gosh, I've got the right documents, the right things prepared to do, to go raise money.
Yeah. I mean, one of the fun things about syndications, I always tell people, is that you can really structure it, or you can really do it any way you want, so long as you're always disclosing. It's all, the name of the game here is disclosure. You want to make sure that your investors have all of the information available so that they can make an intelligent decision as to whether it's a good investment for them. And so as long as we're disclosing it, we can really do it any way we like. A lot of other attorneys have this reputation of trying to kill deals and just trying to say, you can't do that, you can't do this. I always try and flip that and ask the question of, we always say, if you want better answers, you just got to ask better questions. And so it's like, how can we do that? If this is what Corey wants to do, how do we make this happen? How do we structure this so that we can pull off not only what Corey wants, but also is in compliance with the securities laws?
Dude, that is like, I'm telling you, that is so right, spot on, because in business life, I mean, there's so many people that, you can't do it that way. And but you said it the right way. When you ask the question, how can I get this result? And then all of a sudden they're like, well, I guess if you were to do this, this, and this, and this, it could happen. You're like, oh, well, let's just do that then. And so many, I think, I'm not going to say in general all lawyers, but a lot of times they get stuck in their little box of like, this is what I do. But really the law's huge,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, unfortunately, most, and again, it's not all lawyers, but most lawyers like to talk. And in a business like this, I think it's better to listen, right? So you want to hear what the client's wanting to do. And I always just tell clients, tell me what you want to do. Don't worry about the legal part. What is it you want to do? And hey, sometimes, hey, if something you can't do, I'm going to tell you. Like if it's just something flat out you can't do, for example, a good one that a lot of people want is referral fees. You can't pay a referral fee. If somebody, it's very enticing for somebody to come to you and say, hey, Corey, I got somebody that can put in, a couple $100,000 into your deal, but hey, I want a little commission or a payday or something. And that you just can't do. I mean, unless they're licensed in an SEC broker dealer. And so I just, things like that I'll tell you. But in general, when it's talking about structure and how do I do this and how do I do that, and we'll figure a way to do it.
All right. I don't want it to be missed what he just said, because I see this, what you just said, happen a lot, right? And in other words, this happens. People even come to me all the time. Hey, listen, I know X, Y, and Z, and I think I can bring $500,000 to the table, or I got $1 million. Can you give me a little something on the side? And the answer is no. Now, you can get creative and say, okay, well, how do I put you in my LLC and give you an active role in what we're doing? Then it's okay, because now they're going to become a partner, a part of the group, right?
Sure.
But just to give someone a commission for like, hey, you come in here but you got to be actively in the deal.
Right.
And I think that's
you want to flip that again and say, well, how do I give you a commission? Well, the easy answer to that is, well, you go get yourself an SEC broker dealer license, which as you may or may not know is a very time consuming expensive. That's not a realistic thing. But yeah, bring them on as a co-sponsor to your deal, and now it's you and that person doing the deal, and along with it, all those fiduciary responsibilities come, of course. But yeah, so we always try and figure a way.
So this will probably lead up to our next piece, which is how to stay out of hot water. Is that kind of, you sent me the title, of course I didn't write it down, so.
I think the way I like to put it is just practicing safe syndication.
Yes.
So
safe syndication, baby.
Yeah, we want to make sure we're practicing safe syndication. So that's kind of the next step, and really, I'll try and, I don't want to bore you guys with too much with the details, but essentially, as we mentioned before, when you're doing something like this, you're most likely dealing with a security. And anytime you're dealing with security, there's really only three things you need to worry about. Number one, you either need to register that syndication or that security with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a federal government agency.
Yep.
Or number two, you've got to find an exemption to registration. Or number three, it's illegal. Those are really the three things, coming from a context standpoint. And so number one, you almost never want to register your syndication, primarily because number one, it's going to take you over a year and a half, maybe 2 years to get that through the governmental process. So how many of you guys have, a year or two to close on a property once it's to contract, right?
9
Not going to happen.
days, yeah.
Right. And as you can imagine, when you're dealing with the federal government, everything's super easy and streamlined, and everything goes perfectly, in 3 days, which of course never happens. So it's going to cost you 6 or 7 figures. So registering with the SEC is like the last thing we want to do.
And that would be like just to put it in context, that's usually like a new IPO or something like that. That's what those people are doing.
That's exactly right. An IPO is one of the ways you can do it, or even just kind of a private, like there's a Reg A that you can do.
Yeah, a Reg A, right?
And you register, and that opens up the world for you a little bit. So there's a little bit more leniency in what you can and cannot do, and it maybe opens up the world. But there's plenty of exemptions that we have, which we'll talk about in a sec, that really make it a lot easier to.
Which is the way I like to operate. I like to underwrite under the exemptions, and I've talked with doing a fund, right? But honestly, I don't even like the process of doing fund because I think it screws up my, let's put it this way. When you have a bunch of money that comes into a fund, you've got to go place it. And I think that leads to people making some bad deal choices, right?
Sure.
I always say, get people to raise their hands and say, hey, when I have a deal, I'll let you know. But when it comes down to what I see this is what Wall Street I think makes the biggest mistakes, because they're stupid investors sometimes. They go and they get all this money and they go, oh, I got all this money, so they're like, let's go make stupid deals because we got to put the money to work somehow.
they've got to have a yield on that money. It can't be sitting around in the bank account. They've got to put it to work, and that's what causes a lot of things to get out of control sometimes.
Yeah, and if you take my philosophy, we only do fat deals. If you do fat deals and they get skinny, you're okay. Everybody breathes, nothing. But if you take a skinny or marginal deal and it gets skinnier, like that's going to create a lot of stress in your life, and it's going to lose, start losing your hair, right? So,
or get gray like me.
yeah. So that's number one, right? Was the full registration.
And let me skip to 3, just because we want to assume you don't want to do an illegal offering, right? And we're not. When I say illegal, we're not talking.
No one looks good in stripes, right?
No one wants to get a straw. Nobody wants to do the Bernie Madoff thing, but the Bernie Madoff thing was intentional fraud, right? Somebody really did swindle someone. You can actually do an illegal offering by doing some really things that you wouldn't think are illegal. So for example, failure to disclose something. Hey, I didn't think that was important. I didn't tell that to investors. That could be a violation of the securities laws. So we obviously want to make sure that you're not doing anything illegal, which is why you want to hire a professional. And so that leaves us with number 2, which is finding the right exemption for your deal. And fortunately, there's several options for us, but there's one particular exemption, which is really 2, but there's one particular exemption that 95% of the syndicators out there use, and when I go through it, you'll realize why. But this is a Regulation D, or what's called the Reg D exemption, which is really where I focus. That's really what I do day in and day out. And the nice thing about these Reg Ds is that they allow you to raise an unlimited amount of money. So even the Goldman Sachs of the world and the JP Morgans, when they raise, $1 billion or $2 billion, a lot of times they do it under this Reg D exemption because why not? It's a private exemption. They don't have to register it, and there's an unlimited amount of money that you can raise. So it makes sense to you. And so, I'll go through them real quick. Again, I don't want to bore the details, but just so you kind of have it in your mind, there's really 2 exemptions. And I'll start with the old one, which is the one we used to have. And this was it. This was really the only one that everybody relied on, which was a 506. It used to be just called 506. Now it's called 506B. But yeah, unlimited amount of money that you can raise. You can take accredited investors, and I'll talk about that in a second, but also a limited amount of non-accredited investors, which is 35. And an accredited investor is essentially anyone who has either a net worth of over $1 million, excluding their home residence, or they've earned $200,000 a year for the last 2 years with a reasonable expectation of earning that this year. If you fit those parameters, you're an accredited investor. You can take an unlimited amount of accrediteds, but if somebody's non-accredited, then you're limited to 35. But the big prohibition on that exemption is you cannot advertise, right? It's a private exemption. Right. You can't market, you can't do Facebook ads, you can't do radio ads, you can't do podcasts, you can't do whatever. And so that was kind of a limitation that a lot of people at some point, you're raising capital, you run out of your sphere of influence, you've got your people, your friends, your family, your foes, and you run out of that. And so the only way to do it in the past was now, well, maybe we have to look at registering and doing a sort of a public offering. Right. Fortunately, I always say a few years ago, it's been over 4 now. It was September of 2013. They lifted that prohibition against advertising.
And let's talk about how long that prohibition has been in effect. Since like 1933, right?
Yeah, this all comes from the 1933 Act. So it's always been a prohibition against, marketing your securities unless you go the registered act.
So let's think about, back in this is called like the whisper speakeasy, right? Back in the day, before this new law came into effect, it was really how big is your networks, right? And of course, the brokerage houses and the people that have huge companies and huge networks, they really win in that situation. Now, the small operator like me, you've got to really work hard to go find and meet people and like that know you, like you, trust you, right?
Right. I
still teach that concept, but this is something I'm working on personally is the next phase, which is just marketing. And let's talk about that. Because that's like flash.
That was, I told people, hey, now the world is your oyster, because now when they lifted that prohibition, you were free to, I kind of joke, you want to take an ad out for the Super Bowl, knock yourself out. You want to do a podcast, a radio show, put together a seminar and invite people over and pitch them your deal from day one. You can do basically any advertising you can think of. The only downside, or the only limitations is probably the better word. The only limitations are, number one, you can only accept accredited investors only, right? So they're just For better or for worse, the government thinks accredited investors are smarter than non-accredited, which you and I, Corey, know that's absolutely not the case. But until they change that definition, it is what it is. The government simply assumes if you have a bunch of money, you know what you're doing. Yeah, you're smart. And if you are non-accredited and only make 150 grand and only have $800,000 in net worth, you're an idiot and you need to be protected. But anyway, we'll get off on that. But so that you can only accept accredited investors, and you must take reasonable steps to verify that they are accredited, which is an additional layer of really compliance. Because in the old rule, which I say old, but we still use it today, you could rely on their representation. We would do a questionnaire, check the box, I'm accredited, and as long as I knew that you weren't lying, I can rely on that representation. But with the reasonable steps to verify, can't do that. We've got to take additional steps. Usually requires tax forms, a W-2 if you're a high-paying professional, give me your W-2, or if you're relying on net worth, let me look at your asset base, your properties, valuations, all that stuff.
You really got to have documentation that shows, hey, here's where my net worth really is, or like a CPA sends you a certified, here's what's going on, right?
That's correct. So there's a safe harbor provision in there which says, hey, if you do these things, you're guaranteed to have taken reasonable steps to verify. And one of them is if you can get a letter from your CPA, who obviously is intimately familiar with your finances, to sign off on it, that's good. Same with an attorney or even a broker. If they just say, hey, I've looked at this guy's financials and I'm telling you he's accredited, then you can rely on that.
I see a lot of people going that route right there in this industry. A lot of people will use a third-party broker-dealer and to use the verifying process. Is that what you see too? Is that kind of so all over the board?
Yeah, well, what I recommend, just because, especially if you're dealing with investors that you've never met before, it's a little bit daunting and uncomfortable asking them for their financials, and nobody wants to give you not nobody, but a lot of people are turned off by that. So there are plenty of third-party verification companies that, for a very reasonable fee, will do the dirty work for you and do the verification. They'll ask for the documentation. They'll get it all. They won't share that with you, which is investors,
weird.
And they'll just provide a letter to you and saying, Corey, I've looked at your 30 investors and we've vetted them all, and I'm telling you they're all accredited, and you can rely on that.
And sometimes, honestly, that might not be a bad idea, because like, if you guys know me, and my philosophy is less equals more. So the less I have to work and do like stupid crap, do I look like a person that pushes paper?
Right.
I'm not, and I don't ever think I ever will be. So
no, and it just puts
stay
that
in your lane.
It's I call it a compliance nightmare. Just again, dealing with people's financials, you just don't want to do it. And again, the cost to do it is so, I don't want to say insignificant, but sometimes it's low. $75, $100 per investor, which obviously can be taken into the whole budget from your syndicate. So it's just for a couple grand to get that off your plate, to me, is a no-brainer. It is an
absolute no-brainer, right? So it's funny because like that you just talked about, like in your deal structures, right? So like I know you're finishing up our 3 points, but I want to make this a little funner, I guess, because we're talking about compliance.
Make the compliance world more entertaining.
Yeah. So like, here's what's cool about the whole syndication process in my mind. So like when I buy an apartment, Mauricio, we usually raise money to like pay ourselves an acquisition fee. So we get money for that. We get money to pay off all our costs. So like your costs, my attorney bill from you, I put that in my PPM, right? I put in all the costs associated with buying the property. I put, that's pretty much, I mean, anything that has to do with the association of buying this property, as long as I fully disclose what my sources and uses for the money is, it's pretty much like whatever you put in there and disclose, you can do.
Yep, it all comes out of the offering. So you raise the money, and that's where the payment for the attorney fees, the third-party verification, your acquisition fees, any other fees that I've got to put down there, that's where it comes from.
And even though I upfront the money, I usually upfront the money, but you could also so if you didn't have the money to do that, right? So here's like when I talk about putting pieces together and structuring a deal. Let's say you don't have the money, but you have all the other skills to do it, right? To run an apartment deal. Well, you go find somebody that has the money and you bring them into your partnership, right? And you say, okay, now we are going to go do a deal, and but you're going to supply all the upfront money, and then we'll pay you back at the end. And that's how you structure these deals, man.
you don't even need to really make them a partner. I mean, I use the term lead investor because you could literally grab an investor who puts in the first 50 grand or 25 grand, give them a sweetener, right? Because it is a
Side
lot
letter. Yep. I do it all the time.
It's a riskier deal for them because, if this thing doesn't work out, then, you've spent the money and they're out. So you've got to give them a little bit of a sweetener. It's going to be a little bit different from everybody else, but as long as it's disclosed, it's all good. And that's how you can fund that initial, because you need to earnest money deposit. And when you're doing big deals.
Third parties,
like you, Corey, and by the way, I forgot to congratulate you on your latest $12.7 million acquisition last week. So as you can imagine, an earnest money deposit on a $12.7 million deal is not chump change. So that's where you.
Let me do the math real quick. I'm just gonna. I shouldn't disclose this, but I'm going to because I'm pretty proud of it. Times 3%, so $383,000.
Right. So even somebody who's an experienced syndicator, that's not just chump change that they have hang around. So
do that 3 times a year and see what happens.
Right. So either bringing a partner, like you said, or bringing a lead investor, which could even be structured differently. You can, maybe it's just a promissory note with that person. Hey, it's a short-term loan. I need it for 6 months. I'll pay you 20% or whatever you want to pay them. And then once you fund the deal, then you can pay off the loan. And, so it's all good.
So I do that a lot sometimes too, because like when you start locking up a bunch of properties, right, you can get into $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 of earnest money just sitting around because you got to have it to lock up deals. And so that is the way you do it. And, not every deal is a deal, but usually when you get to purchase and sales contract, you've done enough due diligence that the deal probably is not going to fall out. It's a matter of getting all the pieces to go, right?
But the due diligence costs money, right? You may have to do some survey report. So everything costs money. And so if you don't have it, you just got you've got to ask, if you want better answers, you've got to ask better questions. How do I get this money?
How can I? I just did a video blog just like yesterday talking about, I've not posted it yet, so it's not out there, but it will be. By the time this thing's playing, it'll be out there. There's a Harvard Business Review of IQ, and then there's called EQ, and then there's CQ. So IQ, we all know what IQ is, right? And that's either born with it, you have it, or you don't. Like, I didn't get that gene, okay? But that's okay. But I'm going to tell you why. So then there's EQ, which is your emotional quotient. And this is your ability to handle stress and like complex things, right? So that's one factor. Then the other factor is your CQ, or your curiosity quotient. And that is actually it can help, it doesn't help your IQ, but it recalls memory. So when you're curious and you have to figure things out, what it does for you is it makes you learn the process. And so then you can recall everything that you learned. And so, hey, I've never been smart. I didn't have a big IQ, but I've been a curious son of a bitch all my life. And
I think you undercut yourself a little bit, Corey. I think you're a very smart person.
Hey, I just like to play devil's advocate.
You don't get to where you get to be without being a smart guy. So.
Hey, so I'll say one more thing, and then I'm gonna let you talk some more. There's a favorite movie. Now, I'm a movie guy. Like me and my kids, my family, we love to watch movies. And so there's this movie called Devil's Advocate. Do you remember watching that movie?
Oh, absolutely.
With Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino.
And Charlize Theron.
Yes, yeah. So there's a scene in there, and it's my favorite scene because I think it relates to me. So Al Pacino's playing the devil, right? And he owns this law firm. He actually owns everything, like the whole street, but he's dressed in like plain clothes. And he goes, and him and Keanu Reeves, or Kevin, they're on the subway. They're going to some meeting and they're going on the subway. And Al Pacino looks at Keanu Reeves. He goes, "Kevin, the problem with you is everybody sees you coming," right? Because he's like this lawyer, all dressed up to the nines, and he looks the part. And here Al Pacino is saying, "Let's go ride the subway," and I own the whole thing. And so in my mind, that's truly what I have, like my goal personally is like, hey, listen, I don't need to be a showboat. I don't need to say, here's my Lambo, here's my whatever, right? I'm just going to be the guy next door that says, you say, hey, let's go to Hawaii. I'm like, great, let's go. I just booked it.
Yep.
And they're like, what? Yeah, let's just go. Let's go have a good time.
And I like that too. Like a lot of, and I used to do that quite a bit, especially when I was in the law firm. I mean, I love when people, underestimate you, right? So you can kind of sneak in there. They're not as prepared. They're not as up for it. And in the meantime, you've been behind the scenes, just, pounding it,
doing what you're supposed to. Yes.
And then when it's time to perform, you blow your competition away because they were sleeping at the wheel because they didn't think you had it.
They had no idea who was driving the bus.
That's right.
That is very awesome. So, okay, so with those three things, right? So we know that you can do a full registration. We don't want to do that. You have all your Reg D filings, which we do want to do that. Is there anything else? We said 506.
Well, those yeah. So we talked about the 5. So 5. That's basically that's probably good enough in terms of getting an idea what the exemptions are. And so then from that point on, it becomes a game of disclosure, right? And that's what, you referenced a few times a PPM, and that stands for a private placement memorandum.
Yeah, see, I do this all the time. I say things, and people are like, what the hell is he talking about?
So a PPM, or a private placement memorandum, essentially is a disclosure document, which basically tells you every single possible way you could lose your money.
Yes.
It's not a fun document to either write or read because it's sometimes a little bit scary. But I always analogize it to when you go to the doctor and you're, for example, a couple of years ago, I had some oral surgery on my teeth. And so they give you this medical consent form, right? Like all the ways that this little procedure can go wrong, including death, right? I could die from getting this tooth out or whatever. And it's just a requirement. It's kind of a CYA. And that's what a PPM does. And what people sometimes, or a lot of times, fail to realize is that I always tell people, you've got to do such a great job with your business plan and your marketing first with your investor that you can overcome the PPM. Because again, the PPM is just, here's how you can lose all your money. So you just got to make sure you do not just barely get them over the hump. You've got to really convince them that this is the best.
We talk about it. Like, hey, we're going to be sending you this document, right? It's going to read very dry. It's going to scare the crap out of you.
Right. That's right. And it's just, and it's for really,
but I got to give it to you.
It's really meant for primarily a protection for the investors. I mean, that's why it's there. Like, again, you want to make sure your investor has all the information, all the material facts, so they can make an intelligent decision as to whether this is a good investment for them. But it also protects the syndicator, in this case you, Corey, because it's very difficult in one of our deals for somebody to come back later and say, hey, you never told me this, because sometimes deals, don't go as planned.
Right.
The market turns, we had a recession, that great recession, no fault of anyone's, capital markets dry up, and say, hey, you never told me this, or you never, and I'm like, here it is, on page so-and-so, and, so it just makes it really hard for somebody to argue that you didn't give them all the facts when you've given them this lengthy.
You have to, and really that is the whole, I think this is why, and I want to tell you, I think more people give me their money because we have a PPM, believe it or not. I mean, if I didn't have that document, if I was doing things wrong or shady or like, that doesn't ever work. It may work for a small amount of time, but if you want to go out and become a big deal and get people to really get momentum with you, having all the structure, all the documents, and having that big disclosure, at the end of the day, they're really thankful that you did it correctly, because so many people may not, right? And so by leveling up and make sure you put yourself to a very high standard, all ethical, all on board, all the full disclosure, right? It's like, here's what's going on.
And it's actually a required. So if you're dealing with, if you have non-accredited investors in your deal, then that PPM is mandatory. First of all, it's thick.
Bigger, like there's 506C, 506B.
So they are required. The same level of disclosure that you would do when you register a security has to be done in this document. Now, if you have only accredited, again, the government assumes that there are a bunch of smart people, so they don't require as much protection. And so you can get away with essentially giving them. You can choose what disclosures to give them. They just need to be complete. So if you give them one disclosure, it just needs to be a complete disclosure, which is where people get caught up. But it's not something we do to, out of the goodness of our hearts, so to speak. It really is a legal requirement to do a full-blown private placement memorandum to non-accredited investors.
Yeah. And, it is like, so that's daunting work, and it's never something. Let's talk about this, because people ask, I know in my industry, hey, I use the same PPM for every deal.
No,
That's probably
no,
not a good idea.
because each deal is different. Even if it's the exact same market, I mean, each building is different. I mean, I do it's just like you do an underwriting before you put in an offer. I do an underwriting of the deal just from a legal standpoint, making sure I understand every single detail of the project, so that I can figure out what disclosures do I need to make. And so, as you know, Corey, we go back and forth, and I have 100 questions for you, and
Yep.
sometimes you have the answers, and sometimes it's like, well, that's a risk.
Yeah.
Now we put the risk in there.
Right.
But the lack of a PPM, I put together sort of a checklist, kind of a due diligence checklist that I'm happy to share with your audience at some point. But one of the things that I see as the biggest red flag when I'm reviewing, sometimes I review these for clients, is the lack of a PPM. They say, well, it's a small deal, or, oh, it's only friends and family. And so they don't provide us with a PPM. And that to me is a red flag, because not only is it an illegal offering, but again, there's just somebody who's cutting corners and not doing it right. So if they're cutting corners there, where else are they cutting corners? And so that's just,
what else did you got to worry about, right?
Yeah, so that's one of probably the number one thing I see is the lack of a PPM. And again, one of the things your audience should remember, or which I also remind everybody on stage from the beginning, is when you do an illegal offering, when you fail to comply, hey, I don't want to do a PPM, I don't want to spend the money on it. If that deal goes south, you are essentially guaranteeing that investment. Because if it goes south and you haven't complied with the laws, then the remedy is restitution, right? So, hey, I gave you $100,000, the deal fell apart, and you didn't do everything, and I complained. I'm going to get, well, assuming you have it, I'm going to get that money back. So you're essentially guaranteeing the investment if you're doing an illegal offering.
It's personal guarantees and everything.
Right, personal guarantees. So.
Woo. So to the audience, so hopefully, this is good stuff. Like, you got to pay attention to the whole process of syndication. And I think after listening to Mauricio, I think you're going to understand that you should never do this thing alone. So, Mauricio, how does everybody get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way is probably to email me, and especially if you want to copy that the sort of the due diligence checklist, email me at CS, which stands for Client Services, CS@premierlawgroup.net. Again, CS@premierlawgroup.net. You can get a hold of me, and then I'll send you a copy of that report if you're interested, and happy to help.
Well, I'll put it in the show notes for everybody, and I'll put the link to your what you just gave us for the address right there. So that is perfect. Mauricio, brother. Hey, man, it's always a pleasure doing business with you, talking with you. You just recently moved back to Phoenix.
Yep.
And so that's cool, because and now you're not so far away.
Yeah, we're down the street. Yeah, we just had lunch not too long ago. So, yeah, looking forward to hanging out some more, too.
Cool deal. Yeah, let's go do it. And again, if you're doing syndications, right, I'm gonna do a shameless plug, because I believe this like in my heart. If you don't hire Mauricio to do it, you're stupid. Okay? I'm just telling you, right? Now you can go use somebody else, but I'm just telling you, like, if you want to have someone to help you down the path and he doesn't charge a boatload. Now, he still charges money because that's what he's got to do. Okay? But it's not astronomical, okay? Then you should absolutely go click on the link and have a discussion with him, because he is that good, okay? And he protects you from going to the popo, okay? No one looks good in stripes, and you should never even get yourself in that situation. Listen, remember, everybody out there, your paradise is possible. This business of multifamily investing is so fun. It only takes one deal, one stupid, stinking deal, to have legacy wealth for a lifetime. How do I know this? I just closed one, 12.7, or I just bought a new one. I closed my deal for 8.8. I bought a new one for 12.7. That deal will pay me, I think, $300,000 for the rest of my life. Listen, you got to do this, right? Before you guys leave, do two things if you've not done them yet. One, you got to go to Kahuna Wealth Builders and download my Quick Start Workshop, okay? This is a must, because, man, in that whole sequence, I share two major things. One is how to raise private money. You will want to know how I talk with investors, how you can do it. I started from nothing. I had no money, no credit, right? So it's no problem. I will teach you how to do it, okay? The last thing is, if you've not done it already, and this is something I really, really appreciate, is when you go to iTunes and you leave a wonderful 5-star review, right? So do that now. Thanks a lot. And remember, guys, your paradise is possible.